Welcome back to the Advent Conspiracy. If you'll remember, last time we talked about what it means to worship fully during the Advent season. This time, in session 2, we'd like to consider what it means to spend less. To help us with that, would you guys please help me welcome our friend, Pastor Sean Palmer.
Appreciate it. When our family first encountered Advent Conspiracy, our oldest daughter was our only daughter. And we started thinking about what our Christmases looked like. And one of the things that we wanted to key on was this fact that we find in the Gospels that on Jesus' birthday, he got 3 presents. And we figured our kids shouldn't get more than Jesus got. So we decided 1 present. And as we started to kind of share that with people in our community of faith, they looked at us like we were nuts. And I remember one church leader saying, well, we'll see how that goes. And we were offended because we thought we really could do this, and if we started early, that it would work out well. Around that same time, my wife was working for an adoption agency, and she had to do home studies, go and visit people, look at their homes, make sure they were safe, look at their financial records, and she came across a family who was bringing home $35,000 a month. A month. And as she was looking through their records, they were telling her very nervously that they spend the first 3 months of the year every year paying off Christmas. And it was that conglomeration of events that made me realize that what we have is not an Advent imagination, but a consumeristic Christmas imagination. And it wasn't just other people, it was me too, because I really like the idea of spending less, basically because I'm cheap. And I always want to spend less. But as we began to reimagine what our Advent and Christmas season could look like, we realized it wasn't really about spending less, that the emphasis really wasn't on less at all. The emphasis was on spending and how we spent and why we spent and to whom did our money go. And so my wife is one of those people for whom Christmas kind of happens all year, in that she buys presents all year. We've had multiple years where she's gotten to Christmas Eve and wrapping gifts, and she can't remember all the places where she's hidden gifts. And so we started to listen to people throughout the year. What were the things that they cared about? And not just wanted because the commercial was on or it seemed new or Apple came out with a new product, but what were the things they cared about in the world? And then how could we help them partner with those things? And so one of the years where we actually spent the most on Christmas was a year when we partnered with other churches, ministries, NGOs, nonprofit organizations around the world to give people the very gifts that we felt like Jesus was trying to bring to people. Living water, to bring food to the hungry and clothes to people who needed clothes, to bring families to children who needed them. And we went to all of our family and we told them, this is what you're going to get, and we don't like it. We're fine if you don't like what you're going to get. And what we found was that they were more moved by that than anything that we could have bought in the store. And for years, our children have adopted those rhythms in their own lives. And they think about Christmas as a time where they can partner with other people who are bringing justice and goodness into the world. So one of my favorite stories from the Gospels happens in Luke 14. It's a story that hardly anybody talks about because it's really short. It's only 4 verses. And Jesus is approached by a man with dropsy. And most of us think dropsy is what our clumsy friend has. But that's not it at all. It's something like edema, where your body just fills up with fluid. And you actually have too much fluid. And everybody who's passed like 8th grade biology knows that your body already is mostly fluid. And so it's a good thing. And you look at the earth and it's mostly water, and that's a good thing. And you think about what none of us do is drink our 8 glasses every day of water, and it's a good thing. Water's a good thing. But you can have too much of it. And a man comes to Jesus in Luke 14, and he's got this condition where he's got too much of a good thing. And Jesus, without any pomp or circumstance, there's no great extended teaching, he just heals the man. and he leaves and goes on his way. When he leaves Jesus, he has less than what he had when he came, because what he had was killing him. In Mark 10, a guy comes to Jesus, and everybody knows this story because it's another one that we ignore. And he's rich, and he says, Jesus, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? He said, I've kept all the commands. And Jesus doesn't argue with him. He says, you did keep all the commands. There's one more thing, one thing you lack. Go sell all your possessions and give it to the poor, and then come follow me. Well, I know very few people who have ever done that in their lives, but I know that Jesus told this guy to do that. And as hard and shocking as that teaching is to our sensibilities, none of us really want to sell all of our possessions and give it to the poor. The beauty in that story, the beauty in that passage is tucked away in this little throwaway sentence that people overlook all the time. So before Jesus gave this really difficult teaching that none of us want to hear, Mark tells us that Jesus looked at this man and loved him. And might it be that this Advent, that every Advent for you and for me, for all of us, that the gift that Jesus is trying to give us with, the love that Jesus is trying to share with us, is for us to live with a little less, to think about the things that are killing us, the places where we have excess, and to give those things away so that we can follow Jesus. And I think it might be the case, I know it's the case for me, that oftentimes my salvation is bound up in living with a little bit less.
Mm-hmm. Sean, I can't thank you enough for when Chris and Rick and I first started talking about this book and the idea of spending less came up. What we didn't want it to be was just like this grumpy, Scroogey, anti-thought. We wanted it to be a pro-thought, a step towards healing. And so when you're putting this whole idea of spending less in the context of worship, which we talked about last time, what I'm hearing you tell me is it's not just better for my budget, it's not just better for my bottom line, it's better for my soul.
It's life-giving.
And then I heard you say it's better for your kids, because the other part of that is so huge when it comes to actually entering the Advent conspiracy, you used the word rhythm. You said this has found its way into the rhythm of my family. So this isn't some formula that we're talking about. This really is not some rigid, do this, don't do that. We're not going to give you, this is how you should do it, this is the percentage of your budget. That's between you, your family, and God. But you find this rhythm and you begin to teach your kids. I love that, so thank you for that. Now, how does that play out? Because the whole idea in the first session was, foundational. But it was also, in many ways, anytime we talk about this, people are all in on the worship part. It's like, of course, I need to worship fully. Get it. But when we start talking about spending less, we're at a different level of conversation now. So I want to hear from you guys. Like, what are your reactions to this? What have been your reactions, like in your families, when people talk about this? How do you explain this to people? If this really is a conspiracy where we're inviting others into this movement of celebrating Christmas differently, talk to me about what you're learning, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Anybody got anything for me?
I do. I don't know where they When we first started the whole Advent conspiracy thing, it was when my kids were much smaller. Mm-hmm. And so at first, we were really quick to share in all kinds of ways the idea of worship fully, love more, give more. But the spend less, I wasn't sure they were going to adapt to. It's just it's the culture we live in, right? We've been talking about that.
Swimming in that
always.
water.
So we kept that part sort of out of the mixture because we wanted them to have a positive, like, hope looking toward Christmas, and didn't know really how to, I don't know if we did that right or wrong, but that's what we did. And the hope was that they would have such a different and better experience with it, that they would feel the difference, kind of like you were just talking about. And then on the backside, we can go, now, we spent less. We spent less, but it didn't feel like it, because if you're paying attention to all those things, like you were talking about year round, and you're thinking about what is going to scratch this itch for my kid? What are they interested in? What is God doing in them? What is he creating in them? And you pay attention to those things and the ways that they experience love, because they're all different in that way, then you're just a little bit more intentional about what you give, and it is less money. So on the backside, I think, is when we explained that more to our kids. And of course, now that they're older, they really get it. It's been way more fun.
Okay, so now that's a great example. That's one way that a parent would approach this, especially with smaller children. Might be different if your kids are older, but does anyone else have like a thought about how your family reacted to this?
Yeah, for my kids were older when we first started it. They were like 12 and 14, you know, kind of that age where they're really starting to pay attention and compare to other kids. But I think they were fine with it. I think because they had never attached the idea of the more money is spent on them, the more they're loved.
They had never attached that thought.
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't think
okay.
they had.
Okay.
And what's interesting, though, is to watch now that 10 years have gone by. They're 22 and 24. And the 22-year-old has really, to see how these values have shaped her, she is the conscience for where we spend our money. Do you know that company does this? Do you know they treat their employees like that? Do you know that this company does this to the environment? Don't buy from them. Buy, you know. So it's interesting to see how that is just totally shaped.
So for some people, the spending less is not just thoughtful about what that amount is or that bottom line is, but where am I giving my money to? What kinds of corporations, what kinds of, anything that causes us to think more about how we're spending our money.
The justice factor is
yeah,
huge.
Yeah, you use that word. That's right, that's right. Okay, so now let's just be careful here and not think that this is just for us to teach our children about how to spend less. We started there, but talk to me now. How did you react? How did your friends react? How did other people react? Anyone? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah.
For me, I think when I came along with Advent Conspiracy, the deal was I didn't mind making Christmas celebration less gifts, but I had to be convicted because I'm a sneaky shopper for self. Because I followed this philosophy that was no one can get the gift for me better than me.
Yeah.
And so I had to really regulate, what am I really doing here? Because I can't be the hypocrite of the Advent Conspiracy, where I'm enforcing others or even encouraging others to consider how we spend, and then I'm the sneaky shopper that still can say weeks later, yeah, I kind of got what I wanted. So that was a personal conviction for me when I first started.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I know you wanted to say something.
Growing up in a culture where seeing that over there where we don't, Christmas we celebrated, we don't really get gifts.
Which was
as
Burundi,
yeah, being a missionary kid. And then coming here in 2013, seeing all the, gifts. And now that my family is now in Florida and my younger siblings growing up here now, they get the whole gifts. So it was really interesting to see them kind of go back to, let's budget, and being a broke college student, I need to do that. So yeah, it was just really interesting to see like different cultures and the culture shock of
and the way these things kind of press in on us, especially during the Advent season. Yeah. Anybody, let's just be honest here for a second about the fact that sometimes this is hard. Can we say that? So does anyone here have a story about that? I mean, how we're having this conversation. It is something, David, I totally appreciate the idea that, yeah, I can spend less on everybody else, but me, come on. Yeah, that hurt is what that did. So were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was, as a kid, I actually brought this to my family. So I brought up the idea, but before that, like a couple of years before, I had fear. Like I had fear bringing that to them to say that, hey, I think we should spend less. I think that this is getting out of control. We shouldn't have to worry about this all throughout the year, the amount of money that we're spending or that we're saving to prepare for it. So there was a fear to bring that. So what I actually did is I brought it to my mom because I knew that she would be one who would understand it and she would get it. And that impacted the entire family to say, let's pull back the reins a little bit and let's be more thoughtful about our gifts. Let's not just try to hit a dollar amount, but let's be more thoughtful. And the way that we give gifts now is so much more joyful around the holidays. It's amazing how it's shifted in the last 4 years.
Yeah, for our family, it's the gift giving, opening, whatever your ritual is on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve or however that works for you. For our family, the whole process has slowed. Because you don't have this 3-foot high pile of gifts around the tree. And so now the whole thing has slowed. And I can't help but think that's good for me too. You know, that there's for me to slow down and to pay attention to some of this, that's good as well. Anyone else before we go? I just want to give you a chance. Yeah.
So for me, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. We believed, but we didn't like celebrate or do any of that. So they're all in Michigan. So when I moved here and I learned about Advent Conspiracy and who Jesus is, it was just amazing for me. And so I brought it to them because I used to work hours and hours to be able to buy them gifts and send them to them. And so when I told them, I was like, well, how about I buy a plane ticket and come up and just spend the time with you guys instead of sending you gifts? And I remember my little brother was heartbroken. But when I finally got to sit down and have that conversation with him, he was like, well, you know what? That makes sense. Now I get to spend time with you and not just say, hey, look at what my sister bought me. So that was a big thing for me, was to get my family who don't celebrate Christmas the way I feel like it should be, is to have them like kind of see it like, oh wow, like you can spend less and it still does mean something even though we don't have a physical gift.
Yes. So is everyone seeing though that the further into this we go, the more it stirs up conversations, and we can talk about the story, we can talk about our hearts, our faith, and we're really intentional about this, and that really is a part of it. So what I want to do now is to give you guys a question to think about, and that is, again, as we start to talk about, okay, what are my action points? What do I do? What are the things, the rituals, the moments with your families, with your friends, as you look through this, is there something about this that you would do differently? I've heard so many different stories about how families will say, okay, we're all going to pick one person that we're giving a gift to, or we're setting this amount, or we're doing this, or there's so many good stories out there. One of the reasons why we invite people to come back to the website at adventconspiracy.org. But what I would also say is you've got good ideas and the person sitting next to you has some really interesting ideas. So would you guys just talk to each other a little bit about this idea of what it means to spend less this Advent season, okay? Thank you again for being with us in session 2. You can certainly, as you did last time, you can use the question I just gave them to stir up some things. You also have those questions and thoughts at the end of this chapter. I hope that you're enjoying this. I hope that it is stirring the kinds of conversations that you just heard about. Be sure to come back for session 3 because it fits so perfectly with session 2, okay? Thanks.